Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said today a Conservative government will repeal all carbon pricing in Canada in favor of clean technology and clean manufacturing tax credits.
There will be no taxes on consumers, no taxes on Canadian industries. Instead of taxes, we will use technology. Technology, not taxes, is the best way to fight climate change and protect our environment.
As it stands, the federal carbon pricing system has two major components: a consumer levy on fuel paid by consumers and an emissions trading system for large industrial emitters, commonly known as the industrial carbon tax, which is paid by industrial emitters. In one of Mark Carney's first acts as Prime Minister, he took steps to eliminate the consumer carbon tax by setting its rate to zero. Today, Poilievre said he would also eliminate the industrial carbon tax. Now, Canada has a target of net zero emissions by 2050, so where do these changes leave Canada's climate goals? Chris Severson-Baker, is the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute, and he joins me now. Chris, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks for having me.
So consumer carbon pricing is dead. That's 8 to 14% of the emissions reductions by some estimates that need to be replaced. Industrial pricing is a whole lot bigger. What does it mean if that goes away as well?
It's in the range of 20 to 50%. It is the lion's share of the emission reductions under Canada's current plan. It's the most important feature in what we currently have, and getting rid of it and trying to replace it with a taxpayer-based system would be extremely expensive. Right now, we have a polluter pays system that is augmented by a series of tax incentives to encourage industry to follow through with decarbonization plans. And it also funds a lot of research and pilot projects and commercial pilot projects.
Right. So a lot of the money that's paid because of the emissions is then used for decarbonization initiatives and pays for some of those subsidies, to help create sort of a virtuous circle. But the criticism of it is that if you tax a steel mill, that's going to be passed on to consumers. If you tax a heavy, industrial manufacturer, that's going to be passed on to consumers. Is that what actually happens with the industrial pricing policy?
No, that's not what happens. So the prices for these types of commodities are set by international prices, right? So we're trading internationally. So the price for steel and aluminum is set by the international market. It is not. We're going to face those prices one way or another. And one of the things that I think we really need to keep in mind is that we're trying to increase trade with countries other than the United States for obvious reasons. The United States has been very aggressive towards Canada with its economic policy, and the European Union and the UK are just in a year or 2 years from now are going to introduce what's called a carbon border adjustment. So they're essentially saying we're going to apply a tariff on products coming into the EU and into the UK that don't meet the same standards in terms of carbon emissions. And so if we don't have a carbon price, they're going to apply a carbon price, and they're going to keep that money. Whereas if we maintain our system, then that money is available to be reinvested in the Canadian economy in the form of research, R&D, and commercialization of technologies that we need.
So the only way to avoid a carbon price entirely is if you have none domestically and then seek trade with countries that also have no carbon price. Because if you try to expand with Europe and the UK, where we have, broad trade agreements, you're going to get hit with something one way or another, is essentially what it means, right? You either pay it here and the revenue stays here, or you pay it there and the revenue stays there.
Right. And we're among the majority of countries in the G20 that have carbon pricing regimes. But the three countries that don't are the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. And so we actually want to work with our European partners and the UK to ensure that the products that we're able to produce that are very low in emissions have access to those markets. And that the products that are coming from other countries that have very high emissions are kept out of those markets. I think that, but I want to say that the biggest thing that's at stake right now is Pierre Poilievre's announcement today creates an enormous amount of additional uncertainty in the Canadian economy, companies have based a lot of their economic choices, their decisions, on the industrial carbon pricing system being in place. They've advocated for it to remain in place. And there's already a ton of uncertainty that's been created by the Trump tariffs, and this is only going to make that situation worse.
Well, I was looking at a letter from October of 2024, so not that long ago, and it's Canadian industry proposes 5 fixes to industrial carbon pricing. So it calls for changes. A lot of it's red tape and alignment between the patchwork of provincial programs that exist, but they say we support industrial carbon pricing as the backbone of decarbonization across this country. And the people who have signed this are like the Canadian Steel Producers Association, which is one of the industries we're focusing on today, the Cement Association of Canada, and the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. I mean, I know tariffs are hammering steel and others right now, but where does this uncertainty leave those sectors as they try to transition to a net zero target by the middle part of the century?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the companies have been advocating for maintenance of the industrial carbon pricing system and strengthening and making it more transparent, not proposing alternatives. So there really isn't anybody in corporate Canada that's calling for what the Conservative Party has announced today. What they would like to see is more consistency between the different provinces and their carbon pricing regimes. They'd like to see more transparency around the trades of credits so they understand what the prices are associated with those trades, so they have a better ability to place a value on avoided carbon when they're making their economic investment decisions. It's very clear. And this is also, the oil sands sector delivered this same message. They framed it as opposition to the oil and gas emission cap, but they are in favor of industrial carbon pricing. So this is a message that's been uniformly delivered to Ottawa. Okay,
so just quickly, the Conservatives have talked about getting rid of it entirely. Mark Carney, we don't know exactly yet how this is going to work in the fine print, but he's talking about making it more robust and more rigorous to get even more emissions reductions through industrial pricing to make up for the elimination of the consumer pricing scheme, at least in the short term. How do you think industry will react to that? Because it's uncertainty, not of the same magnitude, but it's a change that may be requiring them to do more. What are your thoughts there?
So what industry has been asking for is keep going, maintain the system, make it clear, make it more so that they can bank on it further into the future. So when carbon pricing was originally introduced, it was a very low price, and it also applied to a fraction of the overall emissions. And then over time, the prices steadily increased according to a schedule, and the amount of coverage of the emissions has also increased. And so essentially what they're saying is we want to know what that long-term carbon price is going to look like as far out in the future as possible, so that we can make very, very sound economic choices going forward.
So which option makes them more nervous in your view? If you're sitting there today with a board of directors who want to know, which path do you think is more appealing for the industries?
Well, I'm worried that already some companies are going to have a hard time getting their final investment decision until after the federal election because of what the Conservatives have announced today. That's the worst outcome of this announcement, I think, and coming at a time when there's so much uncertainty around investment in Canada. And then if there were, then they're going to want to see what happens if the Conservatives form a government. How long will it take before new rules are put in place? Will the provinces maintain their industrial carbon systems, or will they also get rid of their industrial carbon systems? It just creates an enormous amount of questions at a time when industry is already struggling under so much uncertainty.
Okay. Well, look, I want to thank you for answering as many of my questions as we could squeeze in. That's Chris Severson-Baker, the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute. Thank you, sir. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you.